one of the interesting dynamics when talking about Israel that emerges, I don't know, 80, 90% of the time, is a dynamic where they're accusing and we're defending. They're asking questions and we're trying to justify and explain the answer. The word hasbara literally means to explain, which is why I'm not a huge fan of that. So if Peter says to me, yeah, but how do you justify this? And don't you think Israel should do that? I could try to defend, I could try to argue, or I could turn to Peter and say, you know what, Peter? I think we can both agree that the situation right now is absolutely tragic. I think we can agree on that. And I would be the first one to try and do everything in our power to minimize the amount of people that are being hurt. And in fact, the Israeli army is known historically for using unprecedented measures of distinguishing between innocent civilians and combatants in a highly densely populated area where the enemy uses human shields. And still, I think it's a tragedy. But Peter, what would you do, right? Ask the other person, change the dynamic, and ask the other person to answer the question. I once spoke with a guy from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government when I was speaking on that campus. And he said to me, Israel is not being creative about solving this conflict. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you have to take a page out of the biography of Dr. Martin Luther King. He didn't know that I am a huge fan of Dr. King. And I've read almost every one of his speeches. And I said to him, listen, you had me at King. What should we learn from this great man? And he said to me, you need to learn not to be afraid. And I said, tell me more. What does that mean? He said, you need to dismantle all of the roadblocks. And remember, I'm reminding you, this is 20 years ago. And I said to him, I'm not reminding, I didn't say it, so I'm telling you now. I said to him, wouldn't that cause a massive increase in casualties of suicide bombers? He said, see, I told you, you're managed by fear. I said, you're right. I admit it. I'm afraid. So what do you recommend? He said, remove the roadblocks. The number of casualties that you will lose in the short term will be dwarfed by the number of casualties over time of this prolonged war. Be creative. I said, you know what? That's a very original approach. I admit that I hadn't considered it. So tell me something. I work with companies, I do strategic planning, I build operational roadmaps. And usually when we have a thesis for a roadmap, we identify timelines, milestones, key performance indicators, so that we can assess if our assumptions are correct or incorrect. Tell me, how long after we dismantle the roadmap should we expect peace? He said, I don't know. I said, that's a fair answer, but is it days, is it weeks, is it months? He says, no, it will probably take time. I said, okay. And if I want to take your proposal back to my country and advocate it for my peers, what should I tell them should be the death count that we're okay with? Because we agreed that there would be a rise in suicide bombers and we agreed that we shouldn't be afraid, but at least let me set expectations with my people. How many Israelis will die before peace breaks out? He said, I don't know. I said, well, can you estimate? I mean, I want to be able to present your proposal. By the end of a 10-minute conversation, without me being antagonistic, without me trying to make him fail, in fact, I was actually trying to prove him right, which is a policy I believe in persuasion. He came up and he said, look, I don't have all the details. This needs to be analyzed. This needs to be worked out. I just think that you need to be more creative. And I said, okay, so if I do take your idea back to Israel, should we analyze it before we dismantle the checkpoints or should we dismantle them tomorrow morning? And he says, no, that's a fair point. You should probably analyze my proposal more before dismantling the checkpoints, right? So in a sense, I went with the resistance. I facilitated what I call a deeper level of analysis in the conversation about Israel. Now, why does that work? Because when you consider the amount of people and the amount of hours spent trying to figure out a solution to this conflict over the past 50, 60, 70 years, to think that the solution lies with a single statement that could be posted on a poster in a protest, and that all of these people just happen to have missed that one poster, end the occupation, stop the roadblocks, a one-line solution to a 100-year-old conflict. Do we really think it's that simple? And most of the people who are protesting against Israel their entire protest is limited to a one-liner on a post on LinkedIn or on Facebook. By asking them, what would you do? And by driving the conversation into more detail that they have to provide to us, we are helping them realize the inherent complexity of the situation, and we are turning their certainty into a degree of uncertainty. And that's usually what you want to do in general persuasion. It's definitely what you want to do when talking about Israel. You don't want to convince them in one swoop. That's usually not going to work. What you want to do is get them to feel something, and you want them to think deeper about their opinions or about what they're being exposed to through questions that you ask them using the role reversal principle. And you do it in a pleasant way where you're not cross-examining them. You're just thinking with them, and you're facilitating a deeper level of analysis.